There we go. So now that everyone is sort of consenting to have their faces recorded and their speech recorded, we'll keep all of the, incriminating disclosures to a minimum. No deep, dark personal secrets, hopefully. But as I mentioned, I think we'll have a good time with some of this. I'm going to keep it fairly conversational, fairly loose. I'd like to actually just be able to see faces on the screen rather than my usual Google Doc. So what we're here to talk about is this idea of poised to perform. And I'll just lay my cards on the table from the outset. I think that if you figure out some of the body stuff and figure out how to transfer that into some of the life stuff and some of the business stuff, you're going to have a way easier time in life. Now, I think that because it's sort of matched up with my personal experience thus far. Some people know a bit more about my backstory. I used to work a very soul-sucking job at the Environmental Protection Agency. I used to be in a lot of pain from an old wrestling injury. And I used to be very good at ignoring a lot of the signals my body was giving me. And it turns out that strategy has a pretty short runway, as I'm sure many of us have experienced at some season in our life before. If we're not able to attend to these things, life gets pretty difficult pretty quickly. But if we are able to attend to these, and not just attend to them and take care of them, but actually transfer and apply what we've learned, again, life seems to open up in a pretty beautiful way. So that's my hope, is that we can actually make that the case for you too. And at the very least, we can talk through how that's done. I know it is a big and frankly insane promise to say your life's going to change in a Saturday morning or evening or afternoon. It's not the case, right? We're all grown-ups. We know that's not true, but this sort of change can take place quite rapidly once we get a sense of the principles involved. So before we get into all sorts of heady concepts and theories and principles, let's take a few moments to actually make sure we are connected to the body somehow. Go figure. That, again, gives us a little easier time in digesting some of this. So I'll walk you through a couple of practices that we use in the Poised to Perform curriculum, because they turn out to be quite effective. First of all, we're going to start with 2 questions to help you get a sense of your personal dashboard. The first of which is quite simple. How are you? Deceptively simple, almost. But how are you? Good, bad, stressed, over the moon, excited, whatever the case is. You can have a couple of moments and note how you start making that distinction, what kind of adjective you'd use to describe yourself at this point. And when you have a sense of how you are, the next question gets us into really some of the good stuff. How do you know how you are? This is where we start to build on the foundations of our embodied cognition. It's how we actually make sense of our experience. So if you're bad, or if you're good, if you're stressed, if you're excited, how is it that you know how you are? What are the little sensory signals your body is giving you? What sort of communication is taking place? It gives you a sense of how you're doing as you sit here. These 2 questions make a really useful check-in for us through the day. A lot of folks in the program currently use this as a morning practice. Some people just do it on throughout the day. I go through it basically before every client session I do, because in particular, I want to know how I'm showing up for my clients. And I also want to know what kind of things my body is asking of me. If I plan to sort of perform the way I'd like to perform, what does my body require of me? As much as I might require things of it, I've got to make sure that we don't have skewed expectations, that I'm not making unreasonable demands, or else, go figure, my body's going to start making some demands on me as well. So with that, let's see if we can change some of this even a little bit more. You might, for a moment, consider where it is you make contact with the ground or the chair, whatever supporting surface you have underneath of you. we'll see if we can start to shape shift a little bit, actually change our embodied state. And in my world, this always starts with support. So notice how it is that you make contact with that support beneath you. Where is it clearest in your body that you're not just floating through space? You're actually anchored to the world in a particular way. Where is it that you sense that bit of compression underneath of you that lets you know the floor is not going to cave in, that you're actually secure and safe at this point? Now, in particular, one of the ideas that I like to work with is this hourglass concept of the body. If you think of your body, and many of you will be familiar with this, if you think of your body as being composed of all sorts of grains of sand, just like in an hourglass, if you were to tip more and more of that sand into those places where you feel the clearest contact with the ground or the chair beneath you, notice how that gives you a sense of being a little heavier, a little more clearly in contact, perhaps, with that supporting surface. And of course, you know how grains of sand pile up. They get a little broader at the base. They get a little taller toward the top. And maybe you have a sense of that taking place in your own body now. Now, from this place of support, I could do the usual thing and ask you to take a deep, relaxing breath where you might go, but let's avoid that. Would you actually focus on a full exhalation first? Would you breathe out deliberately? Not wringing yourself empty per se, but would you simply exhale and maybe take a moment to pause at the bottom of that exhalation? Watch where that inhalation first takes root within you. And then you take a breath in whenever your body signals to you that, yeah, it's time to do that. Now, from there, you might actually orient to your surroundings too. You could look left, could look right, could look up, could look down. Many people know this little trick that I use with myself where I actually talk through sometimes and say, well, aren't any tigers there in the corner? No dragons up there overhead, nothing, no scorpions down here about to sting me. And as silly as that might seem, again, when I start to look around the room and place myself in space, I give myself a firsthand experience, a firsthand reminder that, yeah, I am okay right here. There are no existential threats in my immediate surroundings. And that's one of the things that the body is particularly curious about, is the presence of an existential threat. And go figure, after the past year and a half, we've got some experience dealing with the perception of existential threats. So now that we've gone through this little practice, again, let's close this feedback loop. How are you? How are you now? And how do you know? What's different about the body now? What's different about your sense of self now, even after just a couple of minutes worth of practice? This, again, is how we get to the base layer of our embodied cognition. Basically, that idea that we think and feel with our whole bodies. It's not just here, or not just here. We don't think with the brain and feel with the heart. It's our entire self involved. Our entire self is giving us these little clues as to how we're doing. So to begin this little practice, I'd like to share a framework that I find is incredibly useful in organizing change. Some of you know this one quite well from other programs we've gone through. We can think of a four-part framework for change. And this is developed by a team of researchers back in the 70s, 80s at the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto, working with all sorts of treatment-resistant conditions, from schizophrenia to chronic pain to PTSD. And they were able to make a lot more progress in 10 sessions or so than most people would make in months or years of conventional therapies, because they were organized around this framework. So the first part is a clear definition of the problem. If we want to make a change, we have to have a really clear definition of what that situation is that we'd like to change. And the beautiful thing is, you know this right now. You have a really good sense, I would imagine, of what sort of circumstances in your life you'd like to change. I mean, there's a reason why we're here, right? There's something that we would like to shift somehow. Now, in the ecosomatics work, we look at this intersection of three worlds. There's the sort of material external world, the physical world that we move through. And maybe one of the things you'd like to change is the ease with which you move through that world. Maybe there's a sense that when you get out of bed, well, you don't quite have the spring in your step that you used to. Or maybe you don't feel as strong or as present or as grounded as you might like. Some people might be dealing with just excruciating pain. I mean, there are a lot of ways to suffer in life, right? So we might fit these in the category of that physical world. And then, of course, there's this second world, which is sort of the social, relational world. It's the sense of how you're doing in the human world, whether your friendships, romantic relationships, business relationships as well. I mean, Sartre had that idea that hell is other people, but other people are also how we, sort of exist and come into being and experience much of anything in the world. Now, you might have some meaningful restriction on the way that you relate to other people. Maybe you can't present with as much confidence as you might like. Or in business, you have a hard time kind of speaking the worth of your work into the world. Maybe you have a hard time saying no, some of the kind of people-pleasing tendencies. You don't want to rock the boat too much, that sort of thing. So that might be a way to think about some of the characteristics of this problem situation. And of course, there's this third world that I mentioned, which is our internal world, the internal landscape. This is essentially the sense of self that you have, the way that you make meaning out of your experience. Many of you know that I'm quite fond of anchoring all of this with the obvious statement that you're going to die at some point. And I hope you can live life in such a way that you die free from regret. That, to me, is probably something like hell. That last achingly long moment of life where we're just filled with fear and regret. It really seems to me that if we want to improve the quality of our internal experience, we would do well to organize our life for meaning. We would do well to live our life in such a way that we could meet death empty, free of the kind of clutching anxiety. So you might use this to help think through and to really clarify for yourself, what is the problem situation? What are the different aspects of this that frankly need to shift at this point? Not because, anyone else tells you they need to shift, but because you would like to experience something different. So that is the first piece of the puzzle, is identifying the particular problem that we want to solve. Most people, I should say, have a very difficult time with this. They sort of flee to the realm of generalizations. They have a really difficult time getting specific with a problem because specificity is painful, right? Specificity involves taking your head out of the sand and actually observing the situation as it is. And that is not a small thing. I mean, there are plenty of reasons to retreat from awareness of the problem. Plenty of reasons. We really ought to be gracious with ourselves and acknowledge the courage required to look at that. Now, we don't want to get mired in the problem. But it is useful to consider, too, that there's a future you. There's a future you in this problem situation. If it doesn't change, it puts you on a particular trajectory. And future you may not be too pleased with that. There's a reason we experience some of these uncomfortable things like guilt or embarrassment or that sense of like, oh God, I really, need to clean up some of this mess over here. Or man, me in the morning is going to hate having all those dirty dishes in the sink. Or, oh my God, what's going to be like to go another year and just feel like I'm not making progress with this. So these problem situations can extend themselves through time, but there is a different trajectory we could aim for as well. And so you might think the second part of this equation is a clear definition of the outcome that we desire. And again, I would encourage you not to retreat into generalizations. I mean, what does everybody want? To get laid, get paid, and live forever, right? I want everything to be perfect all the time in every conceivable way. Someday I'll reach the shores of utopia. It's just not the case, right? I really want to, we'll say take the kid gloves off and treat everyone here like an adult, because we are all adults. And we know in our heart of hearts that utopia, okay, maybe we're adults. We could be kids, but we'll avoid Peter Pan syndrome, let's say. It is really easy to think in terms of generalizations. Like, what do I want? More money. When do I want it? Now. Okay. But how much is enough? I mean, again, we could think of this outcome situation, this sort of world we're trying to bring into being in these three different lenses. There's the external world, the physical world. There's the way that you move through three-dimensional space. How do you want to feel when you get out of bed in the morning? What do you want it to feel like at the end of a workday? How do you want to feel when you go to the gym or go to the mat or go to wherever it is that you go to move, when you go for a walk in the woods? What do you want your body to be capable of? There's this social world again. How do you want the web of relationships to look? Are there particular relationships that could maybe fall by the wayside? Other ones we'd like to cultivate more and more? How is it that you want to show up in your human interactions, in your business, in your friendships, your romantic partnerships? And again, specificity, as alarming as it can be, as confrontational as it can be, specificity really is the key to transformation. If we want a different experience, we must be able to specify what that experience is. I mean, that's how our perception works. We notice this relative to that. And I can say as much as I want, well, I don't want all of those problems. Fine. But that's a big, broad category too. So what do you want? We might think in terms of this third world as well, this internal world. What would be required for you to have a meaningful sense of self? What would be required to leave a legacy that you're proud of? How do you want to survive your own death? What sorts of stories do you want people to tell about you? Again, it can be uncomfortable to consider these things, but I think there's a freedom to it as well. So we have a definition of the problem and a definition of the solution. These are two parts of the equation. The third part, though, the brilliance of this team of researchers, was that they found that many people have a big role in perpetuating their problem situations. They try all of the logical, reasonable things, and all of the logical, reasonable things just feed the same set of premises. So this third ingredient they came up with is an inventory of the attempted solutions. This, I'm well aware, is not the first time you've thought about making this sort of change. I didn't log in and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the first wonderful experience of change work that all these people have had. Well, that would be a silly thing. So what have you tried thus far in order to reconcile this situation? Because there's a gap between these two poles, right? The problem situation, the outcome you'd like. There's some space in between, and there are some things you've made, attempts you've made to try and bridge this gap. Now, it's not bad to have tried these things, right? All of these things that we've worked with in an attempt to resolve this situation, they've worked for other people, or else we wouldn't have heard about them in the first place. But for whatever reason, they're not working out in our particular situation. So it's not that there's anything wrong with chiropractic or PT or meditation or gratitude journals or green smoothies or any of this stuff. They're not bad, they're not wrong, but they might not be an adequate fit for our particular circumstances. And a lot of times we have a real difficulty with just letting go of the familiar things. It's like we invest a lot in wanting those things to work. Now, it can be uncomfortable here too, but you could specify that. How much time have you put into XYZ practice? How much of your attention have you put into this, that, and the other? How much of life have you invested into all of these things? The retreats, the cleanses, the this, the that, the stretching, the corrective exercise, the whole thing. How much cash have you put into it too? I hate that one. I've made a lot of stupid decisions over the course of my life. That one's not very fun for me, but it's how we make a change, is recognizing what that situation is. Now, I'll share a secret with you. In a lot of the work that I do, one of the most effective things is becoming a master of restraint. Tony, we were just talking about this the other day, that there's this idea of just being able to pause our frantic habits carrying us onward. So it's not to say you need to go cold turkey from any of these things, right? That might not be what's required either. People tend to swing black and white, all in here or none of it whatsoever. It's not necessary. But we might pause for a moment and see if there's a space for something new to emerge. Now, if we have those three things in place, we've defined our problem situation, we've defined the outcome that we'd like for ourselves, we've made an inventory of the solutions we've attempted thus far that we could at the very least hit pause on. The fourth and final piece, they cheat a little bit on this fourth one because it's really not just one thing, but it's the formulation and implementation of a plan. There's a world I would like to inhabit, and there's a world that I currently inhabit. And there are some things that are going to have to change if I'm going to move from this world over to this world. There are some things that are going to have to change if I want to move from this experience of life over to this one. So what might those be? Well, that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this sort of thing. Now, I don't know that I'm going to write your entire freaking life plan, right? But I will share some principles that we can apply in particular ways. Now, one of the main biases in my work is for system reliability. This is a concept from the world of ecology, where we're looking for a harmonious relationship between the various parts. Now, ecology has informed this whole new discipline of study of complex systems. And I can give you a very simple example of this system reliability thing. Let's say that I want to turn on the lights, and 90% of the time, I've paid my electric bill, and 90% of the time, my light switch works. What percent of the time are the lights going to come on when I go to flip that switch? Now, I won't make you do too much math, but it's 81% of the time. I multiply 0.9 by 0.9, multiply by 100 to get the percent. Now, what if I decide, I'm not satisfied with 81%. I need a new light switch flipper, actually. That's probably the thing My finger just must not be doing the job. But I hear this light switch flipper. It works pretty reliably, like 90% of the time, actually. Only 1 in 10 people can't use this thing. So I'm going to use this light switch flipper. And it works 90% of the time. And my light switch works 90% of the time. And I've paid my electric bill 90% of the time. Well, now that I've added this new thing, surely it should be better, right? But it's not. Because if I multiply 0.9 and 0.9 and 0.9, I get 0.72. Now, every time we add something new, even if it is as reliable as everything else, the overall reliability of the system diminishes. At the very best case scenario, it stays the same. Let's say I have a 100% reliable light switch flipper that I use to, toggle the light from over here. Even then, it's still only 81% effective. I've not improved the reliability of the system. Now, most of us, because of the crazy cultural compulsions we're enmeshed in from day one, we think adding a whole bunch of stuff is the solution. And a lot of people have a lot of vested interests in us adding more complication. We confuse complication with efficacy. So we add in a little of this, we add in a little of this. Our morning routine has like the checklist quality where it just stretches on forever. It's like, well, I need to do my breathing, and I need to go out and stare at the sun first thing in the morning, and I need to do, some push-ups, and I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need my structured water, and I need my, this, my bulletproof coffee. And it's like, okay, let's examine how many moving parts we now have in this system. And is the system getting any more reliable? I mean, this is the challenge a lot of people run into, is they simply don't think in terms of systems. Now, the mathematically inclined among us might think, well, the way to get the reliability up is to actually strip away some stuff. Let's say I'm living in a world where I have a 90% effective light switch flipper and a 90% effective light switch, and I've paid my electric bill 90% of the time. I can improve from 72% to 81 just by getting rid of the freaking light switch flipper. I strip away one thing, and the whole system becomes that much more reliable. So I will encourage you to really consider, what are the essential pieces of the puzzle for me in this system that I'm working with, in terms of my movement practice, in terms of my psychological development, my personal growth, in terms of my business in particular. Oh my God, the business complication hurdles we set for ourselves are outrageous. Like, well, I need Facebook and Instagram and this, and I need YouTube ads, and I need blah, 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 and a funnel and a new book, and I need... No, not if none of those things works, because let's also keep in mind that humans aren't 90% reliable. Like, I love me, I love you, we're nowhere near 90% reliable. Oh my God, the vicissitudes of our mood day to day, like the depressive spells, the like resistance, the funks we get in, we're nowhere near 90% efficient. But you can't get rid of yourself, because then you're dead. So we want to avoid that too. So all of this to say that if we want to improve the reliability of the systems that we're creating for ourselves, we would do well to strip away and get to the essentials. We would do well to strip away and get to the things that are as near perfect reliability as we can. Now, a couple of things that we work with in my world are very simple, painfully simple. We sit on the floor a bunch, and we lie on the floor a bunch. Now, I know this probably isn't news to some people here, but it's a world of difference between knowing it as a nice sounding idea and implementing it on a consistent basis. I think a couple of people maybe have some experience of, that sounds good, not consistent with it, right? So at a baseline, you might ask yourself, what could I reliably do every single day? What is the barest of bare minima that I could commit to? Now, again, we're looking for system reliability, and we're looking to make bargains that we can keep with ourselves. Because one of the other problems that people run into is that they lie to themselves constantly. I'm going to do this every day. No, you're not. 2 days go by and you've demonstrated to yourself that you are untrustworthy. I mean, how does it feel if we add more and more things and try harder and harder and get less and less to show for it? What does that do to your sense of self? That is an awful situation to be in. When I work with clients who are dealing with clinical depression, for example, the first thing we work with is getting a sense of what kind of bargain can you keep with yourself? Because the expectations are going to crush you if you can't maintain that trust with yourself. So please don't kid yourself right off the bat and think, I'm going to commit to all of this forever and ever. No, let's dial it way back. Let's prove that I can do one thing for a week before adding any other things. Can you sit on the floor for 15 minutes every day for a week? If yes, go to half an hour every day for a week. And you'll note that oftentimes when we lay out a plan that's this simple, there's a tendency is, but it's not enough. I want what I want and I want it now. And it's like, well, I know you do. And you need to demonstrate to yourself that you're capable of making this change. There's a world of difference between a person who is organizing themselves for the long game and the person who's just like myopically hopping from quick fix to quick fix and like overexerting themselves here and overexerting themselves there and breaking their word to themselves over here. These things might seem to be a kind of slow rolling thing. It's like, oh my God, sit on the floor for 20 minutes a day for a week. But like, I've got training to do. I got gains to get, man. And it's like, well, yeah, but let's check in a year from now when you've added in this and you've added in this and you've added in this. And every step of the way, you are not depleting yourself and not deceiving yourself, but you're demonstrating to yourself, I got this. I can do this. I am capable of making a change. So that's one key idea, is biasing for system reliability. Many of us have this kind of glorious fantasy that we're just going to willpower our way through an inefficient system. It's like, wait until, I don't know, there's a full moon or you have an upset tummy or whatever the case is. Wait until the very first day where shit hits the fan, and we'll realize pretty quickly, oh, I can't just rely on muscling my way through. Now, the second key idea, we're going to take some strange paths here. So we've got this idea from ecology, yeah, and we're going to go to the world of mechanical engineering. Some of you have heard me talk about this concept of constructal law. Basically, it says that a flow system will increase its effectiveness over time. It will generate more and more flow over time. It will evolve in order to provide greater access to the currents that flow through it, given freedom. That is to say, in the absence of constraints. So, a river organizes itself quite beautifully until dam, other dam, stagnation, all of these things that just obstruct the flow there. The trees out here, they have a particular pattern that defines their growth, and they will branch out and organize in these patterns, unless, for example, there is some constraint that prevents them from doing so. Now, you are a flow system. You are a part of the natural world. You have the capacity within you to become better and better and better across time. Not merely to resist the decay of old age, but to actually improve the quality of your organization. Now we might think, what flows through a person here? Well, there's you flowing your mass across a landscape, There's you moving through that three-dimensional world we talked about. That's one of the key things, is the quality of your movement, and that can get better and better across time. There's this widespread idea that you just have to move worse as you age, and it's not the case. Not based on what we know about how the body organizes movement at this point. So you can move your mass more effectively through the world around you. That flows. And then there's also, and I think this is the more important one, there's the flow of information through you. There's the way in which you express yourself. There's the way in which you put your thoughts and feelings and ideas and wishes and desires into words. And there's the flow of information into you, the degree to which you can learn effectively, that you can perceive effectively, that you can receive effectively. That's a flow of information. And many people get quite stifled in that regard. Now, in my work, I tend to think these are the two most important. There's the flow of mass, there's the flow of information. And again, we know that these things improve of their own accord in the absence of constraints. Now, this ought to be a clue. If we are not sensing that we are getting better and better and better across time, we ought to start looking around for what are the constraints on this flow. What is it that dams my expression of myself in the world? What is it that keeps me from moving the way that I want? Now, the spoiler alert is that it always involves the body. I mean, if we think about those three worlds, the physical, external, three-dimensional world, the social, relational world, and our internal world, well, the body is where these things intersect. The body is where the mind meets the world, right? So it's a pretty safe bet that all of these constraints involve the body somehow. When you think about, I don't know, firing that terrible client, or having a difficult conversation with a partner, or when you think about any challenging social relational situation, where do you clench? Where do you collapse? Where is it that your body lets you know there's a problem here? These constraints that we find, it's really worth having a sense of where the word constraint comes from. I love the etymological roots. It's like, oh my God, that's the birth of the word. But constraint literally means sort of to tie together. So you can feel that for yourself. You can feel where you are tied together. Think about, I know a number of people here are entrepreneurs, business owners. When you think about what you charge now relative to what you want to charge for your work, is there something going on here? Something clutching here? Something keeping you from expressing yourself somehow? No, it couldn't be. That would be crazy. So this tension is always a clue. And I'll tell you this, in a movement sense, tension is necessary. That strain, that grip is necessary when we lack skillful organization. If I'm well aligned and I'm seated upright, or even if I'm well aligned and I'm leaning forward toward you, it doesn't take a whole lot of muscular effort to keep me upright. If I'm seated here and I've got my head over my pelvis, over my base of support, there's a reason why we talked about support in the very first couple minutes here. It doesn't take much muscular effort. It doesn't take much tension for me to be upright. But the more I disconnect from my sense of support, externally, internally, the more tension is literally required just to keep me upright and moving. So one of the things that I have to apologize for the people that currently work with me. One of the things that you're so tired of hearing me say at this point is the sense of when there is tension, we must provide support. If we are unable to perceive support beneath, let's say, the head and the neck, this tension is necessary. It would be insane for me to get rid of this tension if I didn't have support underneath my head. My head would collapse. I would damage myself. So these constraints are a really good indicator of when we lack the support for our desired action. The body really does provide a beautiful, fleshy metaphor for this stuff. I mean, if we think about how our movement is organized, we set our sights visually on an aim. We orient ourselves toward it, and we take one step at a time in the direction of that goal. This relationship between what I see for myself, this outcome world that I want to live in, and my day-to-day steps to get there, this is reflected in the body. I mean, we were talking the other week in the Poised to Perform group, and one of the women asked, is there some relationship between like these creative blocks and this like ongoing neck and head tension that I get? And I thought, I don't know, but the fact that you asked makes me think, yeah, there probably is. So what's creativity? Well, it's the ability to change your perspective, right? And I can't literally change my perspective very well if I'm unable to move my head and neck with a sense of freedom. I am glued into one rigid way of perceiving the world. This isn't dynamic or spontaneous or creative, but this allows me to change how I engage with my surroundings moment by moment. So a lot of these things really will be made quite clear to us through the body. So if we can think in terms of system reliability, we can think in terms of removing constraints whenever they become apparent to us, generally speaking, by adding support. The other thing we can do is develop our sense of body fluency. Now, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how it is that what I do seems to be different from what other people are doing. And the one thing I come back to over and over again is that I think in terms of communication, and I think in terms of information. On all the body stuff, it's my bias. I don't think in terms of pieces and parts. I think about dialogue between these pieces and parts. And there is a language to the body, one in which you can develop an incredible degree of fluency and proficiency. The body is always communicating something to yourself, to other people about yourself. You know, if I'm down here, this is sort of communicating some pattern of relationship, right? It's communicating something to you about other people. If you get that sort of heat, fluttery, agitated kind of charge, maybe that's not accidental. So the body is always communicating something, and is generally communicating about relationships, because these really are the things that define our lives, the relationships that make up our lives. Now, developing this fluency isn't some magical thing. It's not like a mystical path where you have to go lock yourself away on the mountaintop. We had a sense of this at the very start, right? How are you now? And how do you know how you are? You are getting to be more and more fluent in the language of the body every time you ask yourself those two questions. Some people, I can already see, have done a very good thing for themselves and maybe had a sense, I would like to lie down. I would like to change my position in space. My body is communicating something to me. Now, communication's a funny thing, because if someone waves to you on the street, you can ignore them You can give them the bird. You can do all sorts of things. You can respond to that communication any way you'd like. But that sets a different pattern of relationship in motion, doesn't it? If someone waves to me on the street and I just punch them in the gut and say, "Shut up! Don't have time for you right now." Well, that's not a good way for me to be a polite member of society. Yeah. That person might respond in kind, actually. That person might kick my ass afterwards. So if I perceive these signals in the body and I choose to ignore them, well, by God, I might suffer the consequences of my actions at some point down the road. I might establish a very tense, strained relationship. Now, there are two styles of relationship primarily. There's one of complementarity, top dog, underdog, master, slave, teacher, student, parent, child, authority, subservience to authority, right? Anyone have any experience with that sort of relationship with the body? No, certainly not. None of us have ever beaten ourselves into submission before. None of us have ever tried to prove to ourselves some sense of worth by exerting or straining or picking up more than we really know we should be. Certainly not. So that's one pattern of relationship. Now, that can be flipped too. Anyone ever just been totally laid up by the body before? Like unable to get out of bed, unable to walk, unable to perform in any particular way that you want? I mean, these things can switch in a moment. That moment where your back just gives out. All of a sudden, those complementary roles have flipped. And you are a victim of an oppressive system, one that, again, you played a hand in creating in terms of this body relationship. Now, there's another pattern of relationship. This is called symmetrical relationship. This is what sort of characterizes sibling rivalries, keeping up with the Joneses, arms races between militarized nations. Well, you've got swords, and we're going to get guns to protect from your swords. And well, you've got those guns to protect from our swords, so we're going to get tanks to crush you just out of protection. Well, you've got tanks, we're going to get planes. You got planes, we're going to get nuclear weapons. You got nuclear weapons, well, we got bigger nuclear weapons. It's the pissing contest, right? It's the contest that's responsible for the very precarious situation the human species now finds itself in, where we have the capacity to eliminate not just our lives, but life. Now, our body can engage in this just with us. I'm going to push a little harder. Okay, you're going to push a little harder. I'm going to ache a little more. It's like, well, I'm going to stretch those aches out. Like, I don't have time to be tense. I need to, not have my back be bothering me through the workday. Don't you know I have this 9 to 5? And the body's like, well, don't you know I have biological needs and imperatives? And we say, well, I'm just going to numb out that pain as soon as I can. And, oh, you're going to numb out that pain? Then I'm going to really mess up your dreams. I'm going to haunt you in your sleep. And again, this thing can escalate quite quickly. So we can see that either of these things, when taken to an extreme, can become pathological. It's not that we want to be caught here or never here. And it's not that we want to be caught here or never here, but healthy relationships, they're able to switch between the two. And if you think about your friendships, you think about your romantic relationships, there are times where it's like, you're the one who knows what you're talking about. It's like, you can't cook to save your life. I'm going to cook the meals, okay? But then it can flip, right? And we're okay with the flip where it's like, yeah, but you suck at organization, so I'm going to help organize your life. And then we get into here, and the capacity we want to develop is a flexible relationship with the body. Most of us get locked into some pathological pattern of relationship where it's dominant submission or it's the arms race, and we're unable to, let's say, listen to the body now and then. Or if we feel victimized by the body, we're unable to switch that over or to tip the scales slightly. So again, I find it is very helpful to have this sense of, How are you? And how do you know? Because that how are you, let's say that's mostly in the realm of what would be called kind of ego determinants. How am I? I'm good. I'm great. I'm this sort of person. Okay. But how do you know? That's the more than conscious part of yourself that is helping you figure out how you know how you are. So, these are some of the core ideas we can work with here. And I find that when we think in terms of information and communication, we can make a lot of sense out of some of the things the body is telling us. Some of the more common problems we run into start to make a lot more sense. For example, anyone ever have the issue of just 27 tabs open on your browser? Yeah. Inability to focus on any one thing and see it through to the end. Well, what can we presume is being communicated through the body? Might it be something like hypervigilance? Scanning the body, looking for this, looking for that, looking over here, looking over there, getting this. Oh, I need to take a look at that. I need to go here, and I open the email, and I need to do this. Something is being communicated. Or what do we do when we think about ongoing fatigue? It's like, well, maybe I don't quite know where my limitations are. Maybe I'm overexerting myself. Maybe I'm subject to some compulsion that says I have to toil my way through life. Well, that could be a pretty fatiguing thing. I should say, too, one of the other things about lack of focus could be a lack of meaning. It is really difficult to focus on something that is utterly meaningless. So if you find that you're constantly distracted, I mean, I have to tell you, I read some great books when I worked at the EPA. I made my way through long novels when I was at the EPA. The work was utterly meaningless to me. So of course I was distracted. Of course I was looking for every other opportunity around me. What do we make of something like ongoing strain, where everything feels like work? What does that communicate? Well, if we think back to what we learned about tension before, there's this sense of a lack of support. Like, by God, if it feels like hard work, maybe I'm not well organized for high leverage activity. I mean, I just got my 125-pound kettlebell delivered. I'm thrilled. I've added like over 50 pounds to my kettlebell swings in the past couple months through this emphasis on organization, finding the points of leverage through the body. And it's work. It's not nothing to swing that thing 100 times, but like, it's not toil either. If we can leave a task feeling better for having done that task, that's a pretty decent thing. I mean, it's not that you never expend energy, but you expend it in terms of an effective quality of organization. Now, it's one thing to have a sense of this in the body, to know what these things feel like, to listen to the bodily cues, to have this healthy relationship with the body. That alone is a frankly life-changing thing. To go from confused and overwhelmed and just like at war with your body to being at peace with your body and feeling good, feeling at home in the body, that's beautiful. It seems to me we can take it a little step further too. I mean, sure, we want to avoid suffering, but there's a whole lot of other life to live. And the challenge is in how do we transfer what we learn about the body to other areas in our lives as well. This is where this whole idea of movement as metaphor came from in my world. Metaphor really is, I mean, etymologically again, I apologize. I mean, I was a kid who I carried the dictionary around. I love words. So we think about where metaphor comes from. It means to carry over, to carry across. So we can use our movement practice to establish that. I mean, there are plenty of people who move quite well and are utterly dysfunctional in their lives. Relationships falling apart, can't run a business to save their lives, can't pay the bills, and it's all well and good to move well, to have that three-dimensional world attended to, but if your social world is falling apart, if your internal landscape isn't all that constructive, it's like, well, let's take what we learned here and let's just see how it fits over into these other places. You know, if I'm not, let's say, I'm just writing an email because I'm not perfectly aligned with the message of this email, it's like, well, we could just write the email. We could test it and see how it goes. But anyway, there's one of these particular categories that we talked about before that I think is really useful to have a sense of this metaphor idea. And it's this concept of leverage. I mentioned that if we're experiencing a lot of strain, it's likely that we haven't found a good leverage point. We're unable to leverage our resources as effectively as we can. And of course, this strain, this overwork can lead to a lot of fatigue. An ongoing experience of a lot of strain and a lot of fatigue can make everything we're doing feel a little meaningless. It makes it very difficult to focus on that. So I do find that this is, go figure, one of the higher leverage things we can get a sense of. Now, does anyone know why, generally speaking, they tell you to lift with your legs, not with your back? We've all heard that before, right? But why? Why would that be the case, that it's better to lift with your legs, not with your back? It's like, well, to avoid back injury. Yeah, but how does that help us actually avoid back injury? Yeah, more muscles that are stronger, more support, leverage, absolutely. Like, the reason why we do that is because it's far more effective. It's more mechanically efficient. It reduces waste in the body. I can make use of more of myself that is designed for the use of that. Now you can get a sense of this even here. If you slump over wherever you are, just wherever you are, really let yourself go. Be exhausted. If you slump over and then come up to stand from wherever you are in that slump, and just stand up in that sort of slump. Now, how'd that go for you? Are you happy to be alive when you do that? I mean, you could be happy to be alive, but is that the most effective way to do it? Probably not. Now, if you come back down to a seat and you find that connection to the support underneath you, like we talked about before, notice where you make contact with the chair or the ground. You could exhale. You could do a quick look around the room, maybe find a sense of length through your spine. And then if you come up to stand from there, a little different, I presume. A little less miserable, I would imagine. So this is something that, I mean, it's a very quick way to go through it, right? But our body will let us know when we are on point and on purpose. Our body will let us know when we are situating ourselves for leverage because it feels easier. If I'm sitting here and I'm straining every muscle in my body just to keep doing whatever activity it is, maybe that's not a high leverage activity. But I know when I started playing with some of these leverage ideas, I put 20 pounds on what I thought my maximum deadlift was in a week. But I was lifting the barbell in a very different way. It felt kind of unstable. I was like, well, surely this is wrong. But the weights didn't seem to think they were wrong. My body didn't seem to think it was wrong. So that you'll have a clue as to leverage in some of these things. Now, what are some of these clues? Well, one would be the sense of length in your spine. One would be this idea we talked about of the fullness of your breath. One would be the sort of expansiveness around your peripheral vision. One would be the quality of contact to the support. We can think of all sorts of ways the body lets us know, man, I'm having an easy time right now. Even if I'm doing hard work, it's not toil. We all know what toil feels like. And it's really important to be able to make that distinction between work and toil. Now, I'll share some of the practice that I work through too in terms of my business stuff, because there's a way that we can identify leverage in our day-to-day activities too. And we'll talk about how you might apply this outside of the business setting as well. But you'll recall that I mentioned earlier that most of our movement is organized around one key idea. It's that we set our sights on an aim and we take steps in the direction of that aim. If I want to get a snack from the kitchen, I need to know where the door is and how to organize myself to move toward that door. If I'm playing organized sports, I never played organized sports, so you're going to watch this metaphor fall apart in just like a moment. But in theory, I think there's a ball and there's a goal, and you want the ball to go into the net or hoop or wherever. Sights set, and I organize my activity relative to it. This is baked into our embodied sense of self. This is how our movement operates. I think that's amazing. But I say all of this because if we want to identify some of these high leverage things in our lives, there's a little heuristic that I use. I ask 4 questions before I agree to do anything in my business. And these, I should say, help me just eliminate waste. They help me kind of stack the deck so that really I just continue to have nice things happen, and I hedge my bets against the bad things happening. So the first question is this thing going to save me time? If I do this, is it going to save me time moving forward? Because most people didn't get into their business to create a state of indentured servitude for themselves. But that's how most people get started. It's like, I'm going to be free to be my own boss. And then you work 100 hours a week forever until you figure out how not to do that. So will this thing save me time? The second of these questions is, will this thing reduce my costs? Is there a hard cost that this gets rid of for me? Again, so that I can eliminate waste. I can improve the reliability of my whole system. Is this thing going to generate revenue? Now, this is, again, business oriented, let's say. And not just, do I think it's a cool idea and my romantic partner said, yeah, honey, that sounds great. But like, am I pretty sure this is actually going to generate revenue? Do I have evidence? Now, if I want to extrapolate this outside of business, the question is this going to move me closer toward where I want to be? I mean, that's the main question we're asking with all this. Is this moving me closer toward that world that I want to inhabit? And am I pretty sure of it? Do I have evidence to demonstrate that? Now, the fourth question is this thing a forcing function? Will this put me on the hook to do something that I would otherwise put off forever? Is this going to help me do a thing that I've just been kicking the can further and further down the road? So you can go through every idea you have and you run it through these questions. Guess what? This presentation I'm teaching right now, it's going to save me time. It's forcing function because I've been meaning to do this and organize these ideas in a more public way for a while, but I just haven't. I think it's going to generate revenue, and I think it's going to reduce my costs quite a bit. So it's like, oh my God, 4 of those things? Well, that would be cool. It's a very rare thing to get all 4. Generally speaking, I would recommend if it doesn't check 2 of those boxes for you, again, it's just like those solutions we've tried that haven't worked. It's like, it's not a bad thing, but it's just not the best thing at this case. It might have more risks than benefits. So I check at least 2 of those boxes. And let's say, here's why. If I check a box that says it's going to save me time and it's going to generate revenue, I'm pretty sure. If it doesn't generate revenue, but it still saves me time. It's like, oh, well, that's not so bad. At least now I have a little more time to figure out this money thing over here, and that works. But if I'm just banking on like, this is just going to make me money, and it doesn't, whew, well, then I've put in a lot of work for this thing that really only does one thing for me, and it didn't seem to do that either. Now, I don't touch a thing unless it checks 3 of those boxes, basically. Because I just find there are more and more commitments that are sort of infringing on my time to walk quietly in the woods. And it's like, well, okay, so we need to make sure it's a really good thing if it's going to take away from me walking in the woods. So it's got to check 3 of those boxes. Now, you could make a whole practice out of this for your business, for your life, for whatever the case is. You could, again, organize yourself toward this vision you have set, this world you want to inhabit. And you could come up with all sorts of ideas for how to make that thing happen. You know, if it's a business goal, if it's, it's a way you want your body to feel, whatever the case is. If I use the stupid example, if I want to go to the kitchen, well, I could, judo roll across my desk onto the floor and scurry over there. That's an option. I could get up like a sane person and walk toward the door. That's an option. I could go out that door and across the deck and around and in the front. It's like, that's an option, but why? So you come up with all the options. If I'm doing this in a business sense, I just come up with all the ideas. Well, I could do this workshop. I could make an ad. I could do this. I could do that. I could make a course. I could blah, blah, blah. And then you just run them through those filters. Is this going to save me time? Is it going to generate revenue? Or is it going to move me toward what I want for myself? Is it a forcing function? Is it something I've been putting off? And is it going to cut costs? Or let's say in the general life sense, is this going to make me less fragile? Is this going to reduce my risk somehow? Because that's basically all it is in a business sense. It's, does this move me toward what I want, and does it eliminate the risks that have just accumulated throughout my life? Now, the beautiful thing is, your body will again give you a really clear sense of this. You might find that you do far less day to day and week to week. If you run it through these filters, you might find one thing that you're doing that actually checks, the minimum number of those boxes. And that might be the one thing where your body goes, oh, yeah, I can feel my sit bones. And that's what it's like to breathe. Whoa, okay. And yeah, I feel a lot less strain. That's how I organize all my meetings with myself every week. That's how I organize all my meetings with my assistant. It's like, all right, let's run the ideas through these different things. Let's figure out what we, in a bodily sense, have bandwidth for. If I say I need this, this, and this, and this, and this by next week, and you go, well, clearly that's not going to work. You're going to hate me, and I'm going to be disappointed that I didn't get those things. So let's manage the expectations. What is my body communicating to me about what I actually have capacity for at this point? Now, the beautiful thing is we can build our capacity here too. I'll give you an extension of this practice we've worked with. You can build your capacity quite easily by adding a third question to that little check-in we had. How are you? How do you know how you are? And what's one small thing you could do to make things a little bit easier for you? To make yourself a little bit more comfortable? To treat yourself a little bit more the way you might like to be treated? So if I notice I'm stressed, well, how do you know you're stressed? My shoulders are up by my ears and my back is killing me and I'm just gritting my teeth into dust in my mouth. Okay, what's one small thing I could do to make that a little bit easier? And maybe I could breathe. Oh, okay, well, let's try that. And you do that thing. And then you check back in. How am I? And how do I know? And this feedback loop, I kid you not, can just put you on this wildly different trajectory. Because it's little mini repetitions of treating yourself with a level of decency, right? It's little repetitions of treating yourself the way you'd like to be treated. It's little repetitions that demonstrate you are fluent in the language of the body. You are able to listen to it, to respond as a friend, and to learn from that ongoing communication. Now, when you do those things, you have more available for what matters. When you are less depleted or more focused or more fruitful in your creative work, whatever the case is, you exert less of yourself in service of those things. So you bring more of yourself to, I don't know, dinner parties with your friends now that, well, depending on where things are opening up. We're fortunate in King County here. To just not be a zombie zonked out with a stiff drink and Netflix in front of you at the end of the day, or whatever the case is, right? I mean, there are all sorts of ways to cope. There are all sorts of ways we got to make it through. But we can build our capacity to do meaningful work in a sustainable way. We can build our capacity to organize ourselves in accordance with the life that we wish to live. So, with that, I want to thank you, first of all, for your attention thus far, because more and more it's becoming very apparent to me that time and attention are the most valuable resources that we have. And it's no small thing. I mean, many people emailed saying, I would register, but it's, Saturday, it's sunny, it's all this. That's a big ask. And it's like, I recognize that. Yeah. By God, you want to change in your life to be a convenient thing? Okay, all right. But I do want to acknowledge that this is not a small thing you've done.